said it was madness. Who in their right mind would release thousands of water-loving beavers into some of the driest lands in America? And yet, that's exactly what a group of ecologists did, in a desperate attempt to save the dying American Southwest. This wasn't a PR stunt or some exotic experiment. It was a last-ditch hope to bring life back to places where nature had nearly given up. The earth was cracked, rivers had vanished, entire ecosystems were collapsing. So, a wild idea emerged. If humans couldn't fix it, maybe nature could. Beavers are unparalleled architects in the animal kingdom. A single beaver can fell a tree in just a few hours, and hundreds over the course of a year. They don't chew all the way through, just enough to make it lean dangerously, and then the wind finishes the job. Their dams create ponds, wetlands, entire aquatic systems. But could they really survive in a desert? In the early 2020s, desertification in the American Southwest began accelerating rapidly. Scientists face a terrifying question. How do you bring water back to land that doesn't hold it? Traditional methods, rainwater harvesting, reforestation, terrain reshaping, proved too slow and expensive. Then someone said it. What if we used the beavers themselves? Between 2022 and 2023, thousands of beavers were relocated from northern regions, where their populations had boomed, into dry southern riverbeds. Sites were carefully selected near temporary water sources and vegetation, like willows and cottonwoods. The first releases were monitored closely. The beavers were tagged, tracked, and their behavior studied. Although eco-beaver projects had been attempted before, none had ever been this bold. Skeptics didn't hold back. One hydrologist said bluntly, "We don't even have flowing rivers for half the year. How do you expect anything to build dams here?" Biologists warned of unintended consequences. What if the beavers did more harm than good? Initial groups were small, a few dozen individuals each. Scientists monitored their movement, dam building, and reproduction. And then a miracle. Within weeks, the first small ponds appeared. Even the harshest critics had to admit something was happening. The beavers, as if knowing why they were brought here, began chewing down cottonwoods, building dens, holding water. The soil began to retain moisture. Bushes reappeared along the banks, all in the peak of summer. Even more surprising, the first beaver families had offspring. The young began spreading out, and what started as a fragile experiment began to scale rapidly. By mid-2023, hundreds of dams dotted the once dry riverbeds. Oases began to form. It wasn't just about building ponds. It was the rebirth of a land. The problem of drought, expensive irrigation projects, and crumbling infrastructure was now being tackled by nature itself. Beavers didn't need pumps, concrete, or maintenance. They just did what they had done for millions of years. And the results surpassed every expectation. This wasn't just a wild experiment. It was a glimpse of what the future could look like for arid regions across the planet. At first, it all seemed too good to be true. Small ponds became real water bodies. Animals returned. Plants took root. And in the air, a sense of awe. But behind that wonder loomed a shadow of concern. What if nature was changing too fast? Researchers began to sound alarms. In some areas, the beavers were so active that the number of dams increased exponentially. A few ponds were one thing, but entire chains of dams block water flow. What if they altered the natural course of rivers and flooded nearby areas? The first warning sign came when the dams started redirecting water. During especially dry seasons, they retained so much moisture that downstream farms began to suffer. Farmers complained, "There are ponds, but not where we need them." The issue of water rights surfaced. Who owns the water when nature itself has changed its course? And that was only the beginning. Other problems emerged quietly. In the new ponds, organic matter began to rot. Bacteria spread. Some experts noticed changes in water chemistry. Underwater studies revealed something even more troubling. Possible methane emissions, a greenhouse gas that could worsen climate change. It raised a chilling question. Had we started a process we couldn't control? But stopping the beavers was impossible. They kept working, reproducing, migrating, expanding their territory. This was no longer a controlled project. It was a natural movement, and humans had lost the lead role. So scientists made a decision. Don't interfere, just watch. Sensors, satellites, motion cameras were deployed across the region. Indigenous communities were brought in. Their deep understanding of the land helped determine where intervention was needed and where it would be dangerous. The project that began as an experiment had now become a living, breathing system, slipping out of human control. But that's where the real mystery lay. No one had expected the transformation to be so rapid. One hydrologist confessed, "It's terrifying. Nature usually takes decades. This happened in months." Ecologists, politicians, and locals began to clash. Some demanded rapid expansion of the program. Others urged caution. Losing control over an entire landscape could lead to catastrophe. Meanwhile, satellite images revealed the unbelievable. Thousands of hectares of land, once cracked and barren, were now glistening with water, reflecting the sky. While humans debated, the beavers kept building. They had no idea they were at the center of a political and scientific storm. They just did what they were born to do. And that, more than anything, was the scariest part. The sheer scale of change, triggered by instinct. Was this the beginning of a new era of ecological restoration, or a dangerous path toward imbalance? As scientists argue about the consequences, something strange was happening deep in the desert. Locals began noticing changes that defied scientific models. Farmers, who had battled droughts for decades, were stunned to find their wells no longer ran dry. One New Mexico farmer called the authorities, half joking, half serious. "Is this magic? I haven't watered in a week, and the soil's still wet." Researchers confirmed it. In beaver-active zones, groundwater levels were rising. Water held by the dams seeped into the earth, recharging aquifers long thought dead. But the most astonishing discovery, one no one dared to hope for, came from an area once devastated by wildfires. Suddenly, fire risk plummeted. Where a single spark used to ignite infernos, now stood damp thickets, and water-filled ponds served as natural fire breaks. A Forest Service worker said, "It's like the beavers built a fire defense system. No blueprints, no plans, just instinct." Still, not every change was positive. In one area, beavers began building dams over rural roads. A key route got flooded, and residents were forced to detour for miles. The local government had to intervene and relocate several families. But when they did, the beavers returned and rebuilt in the exact same spot, as if to say, "This is our home now." That's when the true conflict began, between nature and civilization. Meanwhile, deep in the desert, a quiet phenomenon unfolded, something scientists would later call the silent return of life. Cameras captured incredible scenes. At dusk, foxes and coyotes appear by the ponds. Then kangaroo rats, hares, and finally, but the most surprising of all were the frogs. They were considered extinct in these regions. And suddenly, croaking by the water, traces of eggs, tadpoles. This meant that the bodies of water weren't just wet. They were stable, clean, capable of supporting full-fledged life. And then something almost mystical began. Locals started reporting that, in the early morning hours, the once silent desert now sounded like a swamp. Bird song, croaking, the flutter of wings. It wasn't just the sound of nature. It was the land remembering what it used to be. One old ranger said, "The desert is no longer silent. It's speaking. And for the first time in a long while, we're listening." This shift felt less like an experiment and more like a natural miracle. An ecosystem destroyed over decades was being restored not with pipes and concrete, but with the teeth and paws of creatures once considered pests. It was the beginning of a new chapter and a new challenge. The bigger the impact became, the more urgent the question. Are people ready to live alongside wild nature that no longer needs their control? The beavers weren't just changing the landscape. They were changing our understanding of what ecological restoration means. And yet, the brighter the results, the deeper the doubts. Scientists began to notice that in some areas, dams were growing so fast they were disrupting not just human activity, but also other animals. The ponds created by beavers started to displace certain species that preferred dry or semi-wet conditions. Reptiles disappeared, insects migrated, and some ecological niches began to shrink. Ecologists asked a painful question. Is it possible to restore one part nature without destroying another? Meanwhile, political tension around the project was rising. Bureaucrats, inspired by the success, pushed for expansion. If it worked here, let's do it nationwide. But scientists urge caution. Nature is not a machine. A mistake in one place could cause a chain reaction elsewhere. One ecologist wrote in his report, "You can't copy-paste life. Every land has its own rhythm." Still, investors and officials were already negotiating expansions into Arizona, Utah, and California. Then, an unexpected incident occurred. In one of the areas where dams covered dozens of hectares, a sudden drop in winter temperatures froze the ponds completely. Several beaver families died, others abandoned the area. Within a week, the ponds began to dry up, plants withered, and life retreated almost as quickly as it had returned. This case served as a serious warning. The whole system, for all its wonders, was incredibly vulnerable. Everything depended on the presence of one species. If the beavers disappeared, so would the water, the plants, and the animals, and silence would return to the desert once more. Amid these events, some experts proposed a hybrid model, combining natural restoration with light management. For example, adding dam regulators, using biomonitoring, and relocating beavers manually to specific zones. But this raised a new dilemma. If we start interfering again, won't we destroy what came alive on its own? Won't we kill the very spontaneity that made the restoration work? Watching the conflict between scientists and officials, locals began forming their own opinions. To them, beavers had become more than just animals. Some called them little desert engineers, others water saviors. Teachers took students on field trips. Kids drew beavers on posters in libraries. But even among everyday people, doubts began to arise. If beavers could bring life, could they also take it away? This led to a turning point. One of the most successful sites, with a whole system of dams, was hit by a sudden flood. Heavy rain overwhelmed the beaver ponds, causing a breach. Water surged down the old riverbed, flooding a farm, a road, and part of a residential area. It was a wake-up call. No one was hurt, but the damage was real. Even supporters of the project began asking, "We woke up nature, but can we stop it if it decides to act on its own?" After the flood caused by the dam break, the conversation around the project changed dramatically. Those who once admired the miracle of the desert now spoke with caution. The media talked about uncontrollable nature and the dangers of interference. But behind all the panic was a much more fascinating twist. The system didn't collapse, it recovered. Within days, the beavers began rebuilding the damaged dams. The same areas that had been washed out started coming back to life again. It was as if nature herself was demonstrating. Failure is not the end. It's part of the process. Scientists observing the recovery came to an unexpected conclusion. The ecosystem's resilience was greater than they'd assumed. Not because everything was perfect, but because the beavers, unlike humans, didn't give up after disaster. They just started building again. And that very trait became the symbol of the whole program. The ability to recover again and again, even after setbacks. Meanwhile, the project unexpectedly gained international traction. Chile, Morocco, and Kazakhstan began exploring similar programs. Hundreds of experts came to New Mexico to study how a small mammal had transformed one of the most barren landscapes in North America. A UN report directly named the Beaver Project as a model for sustainable restoration of degraded lands. What was once considered an absurd idea, releasing animals into a desert, had become an international strategy. But amid the excitement, one question remained. What's next? Can nature truly be left to act on its own, or does it still need supervision, control, and adjustment? Within the scientific community, a new philosophy emerged. Not to control nature, but to collaborate with it. One leading ecologist put it this way: "We shouldn't think we're smarter than nature. We should be smart enough to know when to step aside." While politicians argued, financiers calculated, and ecologists ran models, the beavers just kept building. Their dams became symbols of change. Not high-tech barriers or concrete fortresses, but piles of sticks built with teeth and paws. And yet these very structures held water, prevented wildfires, revived rivers, and returned a voice to the desert. The final twist in the story came unexpectedly from the people themselves. In one county, it was decided to change the school curriculum. Children were now taught basic ecology using beavers as an example, not to destroy, but to restore, not to rush, but to observe, and above all, to work with nature, not against it. Paradoxically, these quiet creatures, once seen as pests, restore people's belief that what's broken can be healed if we just give life a chance. Today, several years after the project began, dams are still being built in the desert. New beaver families settle into former dry riverbeds. Cameras record birds, frogs, deer, even wolves returning to these oases. And it all started with something that once seemed insane. They released thousands of beavers into the desert and didn't realize they were triggering a ripple effect that would change not only the landscape, but humanity's view of the planet's future.